So this is how Peter Parker's life would have turned out without that spider bite, huh? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2021 crime drama Cherry, which will be released in theaters on February 26th and Apple TV Plus on March 12th. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. Cherry stars Tom Holland, Ciara and Jack Reynor, and was directed by the fraternal duo of Anthony and Joe Russo. Based on Nico Walker's 2018 novel of the same name, it tells the story of former army medic Cherry, played by Tom Holland, who resorts to robbing banks to fund his drug addiction. Cherry seemed like a movie with a good deal of potential. I haven't read the book it's adapted from, but the trailer presented what looked to be an interesting crime drama. Plus, the Russo brothers were back directing another film starring one of the MCU actors. I liked Extraction, so I was really curious to see what their take on a crime drama would look like. You remember that whole graphic design snafu when the poster was first released? The Chirk thing? Turns out that it was pretty emblematic of what this movie was going to be like. I want to preface this by saying that I don't hate this movie. It does have some redeeming qualities, but it is such a mess. It's overlong, poorly paced, poorly structured, and just a bizarre amalgamation of plot points, styles, and attempted themes. The messiness manifests in a lot of different ways, but I think most of this stems from the script. Again, I've never read the book, so I'm not sure if this film was attempting to emulate the format or style of it, but whatever they were trying to do with the writing here just didn't work. The film's broken up into 5 parts, each denoted by a stylized title card. Plus, there's a prologue and an epilogue, so really, it's 7 parts. To be honest, I didn't really mind this chapter presentation of the story. It's not like it added anything to the movie, but it wasn't bad. The problem was that this film felt like 3 different movies jammed into one. It begins as a drawn-out romantic drama, becomes a war movie, and then turns into a mix between an addiction drama and a crime film. At the most basic level, these 3 pieces do make sense together, but they don't necessarily make sense for the movie. The whole first act, or part 1, could have gotten the same key setup information across in half the time, maybe a third. I'm usually a proponent of a film taking its time to establish and develop its characters, but in this case, it really isn't necessary. We can tell right away who this character is, so part 1 just becomes a dragged-out showcase of the film's various stylistic tricks. The film hits its peak during the second act, specifically during part 3. It's violent and somewhat graphic, but it serves as the emotional crux of the film, setting up for the spiraling struggles that are to come for our main character. Unfortunately, the third act, mostly part 5, wastes this. The pieces were there, the setup was there, but it uses them in the most hollow and unoriginal way. It just glazes over its thematic topics without having much to say. And that's fine. Not every movie has to have a profound message, although this one seems like it thought it did. But even the story fizzles out at that point. The entertainment side isn't really there, and it doesn't have much to say, so it just ends up feeling like a performative display of how wild this guy's life was. Aside from the second act, and occasional moments in the third, I didn't find this story to be compelling in the least. It felt like an overlong and hollow version of a general story we've seen time and time again, adding nothing new. To the story, that is. Where this film does stand out from its con-specifics is its style, both the visual style and its presentation style. This is going to be an aspect that's pretty divisive. The film's a bit overproduced in this regard, and certainly leans heavily on its bag of tricks approach, but I personally found it to be engaging as a result. Yeah, it feels gimmicky at times, and really doesn't work at others, but it's just about the only thing that kept me engaged during some of the more dull, dragging sections of the story. The style is interesting, but much like the story, it's all over the place. There's a lot of voiceover narration in this movie. I tend to like voiceover, and I thought it was fine here more often than not, but it does dive into that stating the obvious territory a few too many times. It's also quite inconsistent. Some parts of the movie have almost no voiceover, other parts use it as a traditional narration or insight into our character's mental state, but then there are quite a few times where this voiceover narration randomly morphs into a fourth wall break, with Cherry acknowledging the camera and saying the narration out loud in the midst of the scene. It's interesting, and it pulls you in, but it's jarringly inconsistent, and feels like just another cool thing that's thrown at us to go along with the various color filters, aspect ratio changes, giant on-screen text, and mildly humorous reimagined cutaway gags. So it's a very messy, inconsistent film, but it is anchored by one thing: Tom Holland's performance. While I don't think he was phenomenal here, I do think he was one of the most solid aspects of this film, and was able to show off a good deal of range. That being said, I do think he was extremely miscast. I get that typecasting is a pain for actors, and I can understand them wanting to take on different types of roles, but sometimes a role just doesn't suit a particular actor, and that's the case here. Tobey Maguire era Peter Parker in Act 1? Fine, totally believable. Regret-filled soldier who just wants to go home in Act 2? I can see it. But drug-addled bank robber with PTSD in Act 3? Holland just doesn't fit that part of the role at all, and it really pulled me out of the story. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 might be a little bit controversial of a pick, but it's the style. It definitely had its problems, and took an inconsistent kitchen sink approach, but I found it an enjoyable and engaging watch more often than not. The fourth wall breaks were a bit gimmicky, but they were honestly the most interesting parts of the movie, aside from maybe the war sequences. The visual style and excessive voiceover won't be for everyone, and don't really make all that much sense for the story being told, but at least it kept me engaged. The second pro is Tom Holland. He gives a really solid performance and injects the story with a bit more heart and emotion than the script alone would have provided. He's also able to believably deliver on the more unusual aspects of the film's stylistic approach, like the fourth wall breaks. But just like the first pro, this second one has a caveat. Holland gives a good performance, but he's very miscast in the role. On the con side, the biggest issue is how messy this movie is. And it's weird, because it feels like somebody put a lot of time into designing the structure here. This isn't a case of a movie feeling lazily haphazard. It all feels intentional. It's just sloppy as hell. The story's all over the place, the pacing's all over the place. It's like 3 distinct but incomplete movies that could have told the same story in an hour and 45 minutes, but instead unnecessarily dragged everything out to 2.5 hours. The second con stems from the first a bit, and is how hollow the story feels. For a film that takes 40 minutes to set its character up and deals so heavily with themes like PTSD and drug addiction, it's remarkably shallow. It's deceptive, because the movie tries to pass itself off as one that has a lot of profound things to say about these topics, but ends up making only the most superficial observations. It's totally possible some of the fault lies with the source material, but it just felt like a story I've seen before. And it's a shame too, because I really do think that the second act set up for what could have been a really interesting and meaningful conclusion. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying any of the films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Cherry 2.5 out of 5 paws. It has its enjoyable moments and a strong lead performance, but it's really derailed by its sloppy script, messy structure, and unnecessarily long runtime. I would recommend Cherry to people who like uniquely styled films. If you like a lot of visual flair, voiceover, and fourth wall breaks, this one will probably be able to hold your attention. Fans of Tom Holland will also find a lot to like in his performance and appreciate his expansion to a very different type of role. If you liked Cherry, I would recommend Vice. The plot's quite different, focusing on Dick Cheney's life and political career, but you'll find a lot of similarities with the stylistic approach, including extensive voiceover narration and reimagined cutaway gags. If you want another story about a soldier dealing with PTSD after returning from the Iraq War, you might want to watch Thank You for Your Service. It takes a much more straightforward approach to the topic, and while it doesn't have the draw of a bank robbery subplot, it does feel like a more meaningful full and complete story. And if you just want to see Tom Holland in another non-geeky, innocent high schooler role, you should check out The Devil All the Time. It's another darker role that feels a little atypical, but suits him a lot better than this one does. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Cherry? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie that features fourth wall breaks? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information on this review, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.